Imagine a small town where kids play freely in the woods, their laughter echoing through the trees, until one day they don't come home. Picture their parents' frantic calls, the neighbors joining the search, and the chilling silence that follows. Now picture 3 teenagers accused of their murders, labeled as monsters because of the music they love, the clothes they wear, and the rumors that swirl around them. This is the story of the West Memphis Three: Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley Jr., 3 boys from West Memphis, Arkansas, who became victims of the justice system, fueled by fear, prejudice, and a desperate need for answers. How does an entire town turn on its own, condemning the innocent while the real killer walks free? Welcome to Global Shadows, where we uncover the darkest crimes against the innocent. Today, we're diving into a case that gripped the nation, sparked global outrage, and exposed the dangers of a rush to judgment, a miscarriage of justice that still echoes decades later. In 1993, the brutal murders of 3 8-year-old boys, Steve Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, shattered the quiet town of West Memphis. The police, under immense pressure to solve the case, targeted 3 teens with no evidence, driven by whispers of satanic rituals that had no basis in reality. The West Memphis Three were convicted, with Damien sentenced to death, despite trials riddled with flaws, coerced confessions, and outright lies. It took nearly 2 decades for the truth to start emerging, revealing a heartbreaking failure of justice that left the real questions unanswered. Could this happen to anyone even today? As we unravel this haunting story, we'll explore the fear that fueled these convictions, the lives forever changed, and the lessons we can't afford to ignore. Let's step back to 1993 West Memphis, a town on the edge of panic, and uncover the truth behind one of America's most infamous wrongful convictions. West Memphis, Arkansas, 1993. A small, working-class town on the muddy banks of the Mississippi River, where life moved slowly and everyone knew each other's business. The town of about 28,000 people was a patchwork of modest homes, trailer parks, and strip malls, with a hum of tractor-trailers on Interstate 40 always in the background. Families like the Branches, Moores, and Byerses lived simple lives, centered around church on Sundays, little league games, and barbecues in the backyard. Kids like Steve Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, all 8 years old, were inseparable. Second graders who spent their afternoons riding bikes and exploring Robin Hood Hills, a wooded area behind their neighborhood. It was a tangle of trees and creeks, a place where kids could disappear into their own adventures, feeling safe in a town that seemed to watch over its own. But beneath this idyllic surface, West Memphis was simmering with unease. The early 1990s brought a wave of fear across America known as a Satanic Panic. Fueled by sensational media, religious fervor, and urban legends, communities in the Bible Belt, like West Memphis, were gripped by paranoia about cults, devil worship, and ritualistic crimes. Parents whispered about secret societies, and churches held seminars on spotting satanic influences in music and books. This fear wasn't based on evidence, but on a collective anxiety that evil was lurking everywhere, waiting to strike. On May 5, 1993, that fear became a horrifying reality. Steve, Michael, and Christopher went missing after school, last seen heading toward Robin Hood Hills. Their parents searched late into the night, their voices hoarse from calling their sons' names. By the next morning, the town was in a frenzy, with neighbors and police scouring the woods. What they found broke their hearts. The boys' bodies, hogtied with their own shoelaces, beaten and mutilated, submerged in a shallow creek. The scene was gruesome, bruises, cuts, and signs of unspeakable violence. West Memphis was shattered, consumed by grief and terror. Who could do this to 3 innocent children? Rumors spread faster than facts. It had to be a satanic ritual, a sacrifice to the devil. The town demanded answers, and police, overwhelmed and under pressure, needed a suspect fast. Little did they know, their desperation would set the stage for one of the most notorious miscarriages of justice in American history. In the shadow of West Memphis's grief, 3 teenagers became the town's scapegoats: Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley Jr., known later as the West Memphis Three. Damien, 18, was the town's resident weird kid, with his long black hair, black clothes, and love for heavy metal bands like Metallica and Slayer. He stood out in a place where conformity was king. He was smart, with a sharp wit, and had a fascination with Wicca, a nature-based spirituality that had nothing to do with Satan, but was misunderstood by West Memphis's conservative residents. Damien wrote poetry, dreamed of leaving Arkansas, and often felt like an alien in his own hometown, where kids mocked him and adults crossed the street to avoid him. Jason, 16, was Damien's best friend, a quiet, lanky kid who shared his love for music but kept a lower profile. He was a good student, hoping to go to college, but his loyalty to Damien made him a target by association. Jessie, 17, was the odd one out, a friend of a friend with a low IQ of 72, struggling with learning disabilities and a reputation for being easily swayed. When news of the murders broke, the town's paranoia zeroed in on Damien. His black wardrobe and interest in the occult made him the perfect villain in a community already primed by satanic panic. "He's into that devil stuff," neighbors whispered, despite having no evidence. The police, feeling the heat from a grieving town, brought Jessie in for questioning on June 3, 1993. What followed was a grueling 12-hour interrogation, with only a fraction recorded. Jessie, with no lawyer or parent present, was bombarded with leading questions and threats. Exhausted and confused, he confessed, claiming he, Damien, and Jason killed the boys as part of satanic ritual. But his story didn't add up. Wrong times of death, wrong locations, details that didn't match the crime scene, like claiming the boys were tied with rope when they were bound with shoelaces. Despite the inconsistencies, the police took the confession as gospel. They arrested Damien and Jason days later, even though there was no physical evidence. No DNA, no fingerprints, no murder weapon, tying any of the three to the crime. How could a confession this shaky become the foundation of a case? In West Memphis, fear and prejudice overruled reason, setting the stage for a tragic injustice. The trials of the West Memphis Three began in early 1994, and they were a disaster from the outset. Jessie Misskelley faced his trial first in January in a small courtroom in Corning, Arkansas. The prosecution's case hinged entirely on a confession, despite the fact that he'd recanted it, insisting police had pressured him into lying. Experts testified that Jessie's IQ of 72 made him highly suggestible, easily manipulated by authority figures, a textbook case of a coerced confession. But the jury wasn't interested in nuance. The prosecution spun a chilling tale of satanic cult, claiming the murders were a ritual sacrifice to the devil. They had no physical evidence to back this up, just Jessie's inconsistent words and a parade of dubious witnesses. One, Vicky Hutchison, claimed she'd seen Damien at a witch meeting in the woods, but her story fell apart when she later admitted she'd lied to get leniency for her own petty theft charges. Another witness, a jailhouse informant, claimed Jessie had confessed to him, but his testimony was riddled with contradictions. On February 4, 1994, the jury convicted Jessie, sentencing him to life without parole plus 40 years. Damien and Jason's joint trial followed in March in Jonesboro. The prosecution doubled down on the satanic narrative, brandishing Damien's books on Wicca and heavy metal lyrics as evidence of his depravity. They called a self-proclaimed occult expert, Dale Griffiths, who claimed the murders had satanic overtones, a claim debunked by actual forensic experts, who found no ritualistic elements. The defense fought hard, pointing out the glaring lack of evidence. No DNA, no fingerprints, no murder weapon linking the teens to crime. They presented forensic testimony suggesting the boys' injuries were likely from animal predation after death, not a ritualistic killing. But the jury, influenced by the town's fear and the media's frenzy, ignored the facts. On March 18, 1994, after a trial filled with bias and misinformation, Damien was sentenced to death by lethal injection, and Jason received life without parole. 3 teenagers, with no concrete evidence against them, had their lives stolen by a system more interested in closing the case than finding the truth. How could justice fail so completely? In West Memphis, fear had turned a courtroom into a witch hunt. The convictions of the West Memphis Three didn't bring closure. They ignited a firestorm of doubt. In 1996, a documentary called Paradise Lost, The Child Murders at Robin Hood Hills, premiered on HBO, bringing the case to a global audience. Filmmakers Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky didn't just tell the story. They exposed the raw grief of the victims' families, the fear that gripped West Memphis, and the glaring flaws in the investigation and trials. Viewers around the world were stunned. A coerced confession, no physical evidence, and a town so blinded by satanic panic that they condemned 3 teens on rumors alone. The documentary became a rallying cry, sparking a grassroots movement to free the West Memphis Three. Supporters set up websites, organized rallies, and raised funds for new investigations. Celebrities like Eddie Vedder of Pearl Jam, Natalie Maines of the Dixie Chicks, and even Johnny Depp joined the cause, using their platforms to demand justice. As the movement grew, so did the evidence of the Three's innocence. In 1997, DNA testing, unavailable during the original trials, revealed no trace of Damien, Jason, or Jessie at the crime scene. Instead, a hair found in the knots binding Michael Moore matched Terry Hobbs, Steve Branch's stepfather, with a 1.5% probability of belonging to someone else. The significant lead: Hobbs had a history of domestic violence, and his alibi for May 5, 1993, was shaky at best. He claimed he was searching for boys, but no one could confirm his whereabouts during key hours. A neighbor later reported seeing Hobbs with the boys near Robin Hood Hills that evening, but the police never followed up. Another witness, a friend of Hobbs, claimed he'd heard Hobbs confess years later, but investigators dismissed it. Why were the police so reluctant to pursue these leads? Some pointed to their investment in the satanic narrative. Others whispered about corruption, noting the close ties between investigators and certain locals. By the early 2000s, the West Memphis Three sat in prison, watching as the world began to see the truth they'd always known. They were innocent. Could this new evidence finally set them free? The battle for justice was far from over, but the tide was starting to turn. For 18 years, the West Memphis Three endured the hell of prison, while their supporters fought tirelessly for their freedom. Damien Echols, on death row in Arkansas's Varney unit, faced the worst of it. 23 hours a day in solitary confinement, with the constant threat of execution dates being set and delayed. He coped by turning inward, practicing meditation and writing poetry, later publishing a memoir, Almost Home, that revealed the depth of his suffering and resilience. Jason Baldwin, in a maximum security prison, stayed quiet and focused, earning his GED and dreaming of a life beyond bars. Jessie Misskelley, also serving a life sentence, battled depression and guilt over his coerced confession, struggling to adjust to a world that still saw him as a murderer. Despite the years apart, the three remained connected. Their shared injustice a bond that couldn't be broken. By 2007, advanced DNA testing solidified their innocence. None of their DNA was found at the crime scene, while Terry Hobbs' hair and other unidentified prints pointed to other suspects. The defense uncovered more: juror misconduct in Jessie's trial, where jurors had improperly discussed Damien and Jason's case, violating court rules. In 2010, the Arkansas Supreme Court granted a new evidentiary hearing, a rare chance to present the DNA and misconduct evidence. But the state wasn't ready to admit fault. Prosecutors offered a deal, an Alford plea, allowing the three to maintain their innocence while pleading guilty in exchange for release with time served. It was a gut-wrenching choice. Freedom, but no exoneration, no apology, no justice for the real killer. On August 19, 2011, after 18 years and 78 days, Damien, Jason, and Jessie walked out of prison. The courtroom buzzed with emotion. Supporters wept, cameras flashed, but the victory was bittersweet. Who really killed Steve, Michael, and Christopher? The question hung heavy, with no answers in sight. Freedom brought a new chapter for the West Memphis Three, but the shadows of their past never fully lifted. Damien Echols moved to New York, later settling in Salem, Massachusetts, where he married Lori Davis, a supporter who'd written to him in prison and became his fiercest advocate. He channeled his trauma into art and writing, publishing books like Life After Death. But the years on death row left him with PTSD, a quiet intensity in his eyes. Jason Baldwin moved to Seattle, where he pursued a law degree, determined to help others wrongfully convicted. He co-founded Proclaim Justice, a nonprofit dedicated to overturning unjust convictions, turning his pain into purpose. Jessie Misskelley returned to West Memphis, living a quieter life, working odd jobs, and staying close to his family. The stigma of his confession lingered, but he found peace in small joys, like fishing with his dad. The three remained friends, their bond unbreakable, though they rarely spoke of the case that defined their lives. The murders of Steve, Michael, and Christopher remain unsolved. Terry Hobbs was never charged, despite the DNA evidence, and other leads, like a bloody man seen at a nearby Bojangles restaurant on the night of the murders, were never fully investigated. The victims' families were divided. Pam Hobbs, Steve's mother, came to believe the three were innocent, while John Mark Byers, Christopher's father, initially blamed them before changing his stance. In 2020, new DNA testing was approved, but as of April 2025, the results are still pending, leaving the case in limbo. The West Memphis Three continue to fight for full exoneration, hoping to clear their names and find the real killer. Their story is a stark reminder of how fear and prejudice can corrupt justice, stealing innocence from both the victims and the wrongfully accused. For everyone watching, this case carries a crucial lesson. Don't let stereotypes cloud your judgment. The West Memphis Three were targeted for their music, their clothes, their differences, not for evidence. Teach your kids to embrace who they are, but also prepare them for a world that might judge them unfairly. Question easy narratives, and stand up for truth, even when it's hard. At Global Shadows, we're here to shine a light on these injustices. If this story touched you, support us by subscribing for more. Share it with others so they can learn from the message too.